You are a 14-year-old boy, sleeping on the streets of Rome. You wake up and see fine silk shoes near your face. A man stands over you. He's rich. His rings could feed you for a year. He offers you warm bread. You're too hungry to ask why. You don't know this man is Giovanni del Monte, a cardinal, soon to become the most powerful man in the church. You don't know he's been watching you. In a few months, you'll be living inside the papal palace. You'll wear the red robes of a cardinal. And you'll be known, across Europe, as the boy the Pope could never let go. The bread smells like heaven. Your gut aches. But his eyes make you freeze. You've lived on these streets long enough to know predators. This one wears holy robes. He speaks softly about opportunities. About serving God. His voice sounds fatherly. But his gaze holds something hungry. You don't understand that accepting his bread means accepting a bargain. Your body for his protection. Your innocence for his pleasure. What you think is rescue is actually a trap. This kindly priest isn't saving anyone. He's shopping. He's been watching you for weeks, learning your routines, how you sleep, how desperate you've become. You fit exactly what he wants. Young enough to mold, beautiful enough to desire, alone enough that nobody will ask questions when you vanish forever. The man reaches down. His gloved hand touches your shoulder. He says his name is Cardinal del Monte. He says God has plans for you, special plans. He doesn't mention the other boys who came before you, the ones who received bread and kind words, the ones who vanished into palace walls and never came out the same, if they came out at all. Rome in 1550 was a hunting ground. Street children everywhere, orphans created by plague and war. They begged, they stole, they sold whatever they could. For rich men in fancy robes, these children were perfect prey. Easy to take, easy to hide, easy to use. The system worked because nobody cared about street rats. They disappeared and the world kept spinning. Cardinal del Monte had perfected this system. His servants scoured the streets daily. They carried food and coins as bait. They looked for specific types. Boys between 12 and 16, pretty faces. Skinny bodies from malnutrition, but most important, complete loneliness. No family to search, no friends to ask questions. No one who would notice when they vanished. You checked every box perfectly. His servants had watched you for months before approaching. They knew which doorways you slept in, which scraps you fought over, which merchants sometimes showed pity. They documented your routines like scholars studying ancient texts. They even knew your real name, the one you'd almost forgotten after years on the streets. They knew which nights you cried yourself to sleep, which mornings you woke up hoping you wouldn't. But your timing made you special. Pope Paul III had just died. The throne of St. Peter sat empty. Cardinals from across Europe raced to Rome. Each wanted to be the next pope. Del Monte was one of them. But he had a problem. His appetites were known, whispered about in Vatican corridors. To become pope, he needed to appear holy, pure, above suspicion. You were his solution. His beautiful lie wrapped in red silk. The papal election was a nightmare. 67 days locked in the Sistine Chapel. No communication with the outside world. Cardinals sweated in the heat. They argued, they plotted, they bribed. Some collapsed from exhaustion, others from fear. The deadlock seemed endless. While his rivals fought over theology and politics, Del Monte worked quietly. He made deals and whispered conversations. He convinced just enough cardinals that he was the safe choice, the man who wouldn't threaten anyone. White smoke finally rose on February 7th, 1550. Cardinal Del Monte was now Pope Julius III. The crowds cheered. Bells rang across Rome. Children threw flowers. They had no idea what they were celebrating. The most powerful position in Christianity had gone to a man whose greatest skill was hiding his true nature. Within hours, he began planning your destruction disguised as elevation. Your new life started immediately. The boy who slept in doorways was given rooms in the papal palace. Silk clothes worth fortunes replaced your rags. Servants attended your every need. Hot meals appeared regularly. Clean water whenever you wanted. But nothing was free. These gifts came with prices you didn't understand yet. Prices that would be revealed slowly, carefully. So you couldn't refuse when the truth finally came out. The transformation began with a bath. Your first real one in years. Servants scrubbed away street grime with perfumed soaps. They trimmed your nails, cut your hair, treated infections and sores. You emerged, looking like a different person. Clean, healthy, beautiful, ready for presentation to important guests who would evaluate your suitability for purposes you couldn't imagine. But even this kindness carried cruelty. The servants who bathed you weren't gentle. They scrubbed until your skin was raw. They examined every inch of your body like you were livestock. They made notes about your appearance, your responses, your fear. Everything was documented for the Pope's review. If this already feels darker than anything you learned in school, just wait. Subscribe for more stories they tried to bury, and comment where you're watching from. Now, back to it. First came education. You learned to read and write in Latin. You studied how to speak like nobility, how to walk with grace, how to bow properly. Your teachers were priests hand-picked for their silence. They understood their real job. They weren't creating a scholar. They were preparing merchandise, making you suitable for presentation to the Pope's guests, polishing you until you gleamed like the gold in his crown. The lessons came with punishments. When you mispronounced Latin words, they struck your hands with wooden rods. When you forgot proper bowing technique, they made you practice for hours until your back screamed. When you showed homesickness, they reminded you that your family had abandoned you, that nobody wanted you except the Holy Father, that gratitude was your only acceptable emotion. The physical changes were just as systematic. Palace tailors measured every inch of your body. They created wardrobes that emphasized your youth, your beauty, your innocence. Clothes designed to attract rather than cover. Barbers styled your hair in the latest fashion. Servants rubbed expensive oils into your skin. You were becoming a work of art, a living sculpture designed for one man's twisted pleasure. But the psychological conditioning was the cruelest part. Every day brought reminders of your old life. How hungry you were, how cold, how alone, how close to death you'd come on those streets. Your teachers praised the Pope's kindness constantly. They called your elevation a miracle. They said thousands of boys would kill for your opportunities. Any discomfort you felt was labeled ingratitude. Any questions were called doubt. Any resistance was painted as sin against God himself. They told you about street children, diseased, starving, dying in gutters. They told you this would be your fate if you disappointed the Holy Father. They described the tortures awaiting ungrateful boys who bit the hand that fed them. They painted vivid pictures of hell awaiting those who sinned against their saviors. But that was far from the worst thing Del Monte did to you. The lessons grew more intimate as weeks passed. You learned which wines the Pope preferred, which foods pleased him most, how to massage his shoulders when he felt tense, how to read his moods from facial expressions, how to anticipate his desires before he voiced them, how to make yourself useful in ways that made your skin crawl. The boundary between servant and something else began to blur, but you were told this was normal, expected, holy even. Other boys lived in the palace too. Most were older. They'd been there longer. Their eyes held secrets you couldn't read yet. They moved carefully around certain rooms, avoided specific corridors at night, flinched when certain names were mentioned. When you asked direct questions, they changed the subject. but sometimes you caught them staring at you. Their expressions mixed pity with fear, like they were watching a lamb walking towards slaughter. One boy named Marco had been there 3 years. He pulled you aside one evening when the guards weren't watching, his voice barely a whisper. He told you about the Pope's special visits, how they started innocently, a hand on your shoulder, questions about your comfort, gifts that came with expectations, then gradually became something else. Something that left marks on your body and scars on your soul that never healed. He showed you his own wounds, healed cuts that spelled out words, burn marks in careful patterns, bruises that never quite faded, evidence of systematic abuse disguised as holy affection. He warned you about the special room in the papal apartments, the one with locks on the inside, the one where boys went but sometimes didn't come back. The Pope's grooming began subtly. He visited your rooms regularly, always late at night, always alone. He would sit on your bed and talk about your progress, your education, your bright future serving God. His hand would rest on your shoulder, then your arm, then your leg. He called you special, chosen, blessed by angels themselves. He said God had guided him to you, that your meeting was divine providence requiring absolute trust, absolute obedience, absolute silence about everything that happened between you. The first inappropriate touch came during a theology lesson. He was teaching you about devotion, about how servants must surrender completely to their masters. His hand moved from your shoulder to your chest, then lower. When you tensed, he smiled and said this was how holy men showed affection, how spiritual fathers blessed their spiritual sons. He quoted Bible verses about obedience, about children honoring their parents, about the rewards awaiting the faithful. When you pulled away, his face darkened. The kind priest vanished. Something predatory took his place. He reminded you where he found you, what you were before his kindness, how easily you could return to those streets. But this time, you'd go back knowing too much, seeing too much, and people who knew papal secrets didn't survive long on Roman streets. They found them floating in the Tiber, throats cut, eyes gouged out. So you learned to endure, to submit, to pretend you enjoyed what happened in those dark hours, to make sounds of compliance when you felt only terror, to smile when you wanted to scream. The Pope grew bolder, more demanding, more creative in his twisted affections. He brought tools that he called instruments of devotion, restraints that he said taught patience, methods that left no visible marks but caused agony that lasted for days. You discovered that your beautiful rooms were actually a prison. Guards watched your every move. Servants reported your conversations. Letters were read before you received them. Your schedule was controlled down to the minute. Even your prayers were monitored for signs of rebellion or despair. You belonged to Julius now, completely, forever. Your body was his temple. Your pain was his sacrament. The abuse escalated systematically. What started as inappropriate touching became forced intimacy. What began as private encounters became performances for special guests. Important men who paid enormous sums to watch papal entertainment. Cardinals who shared Julius's appetites. Wealthy merchants who funded church projects in exchange for access to its treasures. You learned there were others like you throughout Rome, boys kept by bishops, girls hidden in convents, children bred specifically for these purposes. The church wasn't fighting this trade. It was organizing it, protecting it, blessing it with holy words and sacred ceremonies. They called it charity work, saving souls from damnation, providing opportunities for the worthless to serve the worthy. The very institution claiming to protect innocence was feeding on it like a beast that could never be satisfied. One moment, in particular, made even other cardinals recoil. The announcement that shocked Europe came on May 31st, 1550. Pope Julius declared his intention to make you a cardinal, a prince of the church, the youngest in history. Diplomats couldn't believe it. A street boy with no education, no experience, no qualifications except his pretty face and broken spirit. The Vatican tried to justify it with lies about your virtue and wisdom, about visions you'd received, about miracles you'd performed. Nobody believed them. European monarchs exploded with rage. The Holy Roman Emperor demanded explanations. The King of France threatened to cut relations with Rome. The King of Spain recalled his ambassador in protest. Even Protestant reformers were stunned by the brazenness. Here was proof of everything they'd accused the Catholic Church of being corrupt, perverted, rotten to its very core. The Pope had elevated his teenage victim to one of Christianity's highest offices. Your elevation ceremony took place in the Sistine Chapel. Michelangelo's masterpieces watched as you knelt before Julius. The same frescoes that depicted God creating man now witnessed a pope creating scandal. Other cardinals forced smiles. They went through the motions. But their disgust was obvious. Some refused to touch you during the ritual. Others made excuses and left early. You were a mockery of everything they claimed to represent. If you think that red hat meant power, you're wrong. The red hat placed on your head carried deep symbolism. Cardinals wore red to show their willingness to die for the faith. Your red robes had a different meaning. They marked you as the Pope's possession, his broken toy, his living reminder that power corrupted everything it touched. You are now Cardinal Innocenzo del Monte. In theory, you had authority over millions. In reality, you were still a traumatized boy trapped in an impossible situation. Daily life as a cardinal was surreal. During the day, you attended meetings where world-changing decisions were made. You voted on church policy that affected millions. You met with ambassadors from powerful nations. You blessed the faithful who traveled hundreds of miles to receive your touch, all while knowing that every person in the room understood what you really were. The charade fooled nobody, but it had to continue. The Pope's reputation depended on it. Nights were different. When the palace grew quiet, Julius would summon you to his private chambers. The man who ruled Christianity by day became someone else entirely after dark. He demanded acts that would shock even the most degraded. He used your body in ways that left permanent damage, scars inside and out, wounds that never properly healed, but you couldn't resist. Couldn't refuse, couldn't even cry out, because the guards outside belonged to him. The other cardinals watched this unfold with mixture of horror and calculation. Some were genuinely disgusted. They devoted their lives to the church only to see it degraded by papal appetite. Others saw opportunity. If Julius could elevate his victim to sacred office, what precedents did that set? Soon, other favorites appeared at court. Other beautiful boys with mysterious backgrounds and rapid promotions. The rot spread quickly through the entire system. International pressure mounted daily. Catholic monarchs threatened schism. Protestant propagandists celebrated papal corruption. Church reformers demanded Julius's removal. Military preparations began in several countries. But the Pope seemed immune to criticism. He believed his own propaganda, convinced himself that his feelings for you were pure, sacred, approved by God himself. The delusion was complete and terrifying. Your psychological state deteriorated as months passed. The boy who'd once been grateful for bread now owned palaces, but felt emptier than a tomb. You were trapped between two identities, public cardinal and private victim. Neither felt real. Both required constant performance. The strain showed in your face, your movements, your increasingly hollow stare that courtiers whispered about behind their hands. Letters you wrote to distant relatives revealed your inner torment. Palace spies intercepted them, but some survive in Vatican archives. You wrote about feeling like an actor in a play you didn't understand, about longing for the simplicity of street life, where at least your suffering was honest, about wondering if death might be preferable to continued degradation, about dreams where you were back in doorways, but at least you owned your own body. European courts began planning for Julius's removal. They couldn't tolerate a pope who'd so completely abandoned moral authority. Secret negotiations started between Catholic and Protestant leaders. Military preparations began. Assassination plots multiplied like cancer. The scandal threatened to tear Christianity apart, all because one man couldn't control his appetites. All because a street boy had been too hungry to refuse offered bread. But Julius seemed oblivious to the gathering storm. He was planning your future, talking about making you his successor somehow, imagining a dynasty built on corruption and sustained by force. He commissioned artists to paint your portrait as a saint, poets to write verses about your miraculous wisdom, historians to craft legends about your holy visions. Reality mattered less than the story he wanted to tell the world. What Julius did next shocked even his closest allies. The breaking point came when Julius announced his intention to adopt you legally, making you his son and heir. This went beyond scandal into madness. Adoption would give you claim to papal territories, political power independent of church authority. The boy who'd begged for bread might inherit sovereign states. European leaders realized they were dealing with a pope who'd lost complete touch with reality. The end came suddenly. Julius collapsed during Mass on March 23rd, 1555. Poison was suspected but never proven. He lingered for 6 days, calling for you constantly, begging forgiveness for sins he couldn't name, promising salvation he couldn't guarantee, crying like a child for his mother. Then he died. And with him, your protection vanished like smoke and wind. The new pope, Marcellus II, faced impossible situation. He couldn't simply strip your cardinal rank without setting dangerous precedents for papal authority. But keeping you in Rome invited continued scandal. Every Protestant propagandist in Europe was watching. His solution was elegant and cruel. You were assigned to govern distant church territories, far from Roman politics, far from curious eyes, far from memories of your shameful elevation. Your exile was presented as promotion, important responsibilities in forgotten provinces. But everyone understood the truth. You were being erased, removed from church history, like an embarrassing mistake. The boy who'd worn cardinal red was disappearing into administrative obscurity where scandals went to die slowly and quietly. Life in provincial government was harsh, awakening. Local populations expected experienced leadership, wise administration, spiritual guidance from someone who'd actually studied theology. Instead, they got a 17-year-old with no qualifications except former papal favor and a broken spirit. Your attempts at governance failed repeatedly. Your sermons were laughed at. Your authority was openly questioned by illiterate peasants who sensed your weakness. You spent remaining years trying to become the leader your rank demanded, studying theology desperately, learning administration through painful trial and error, attempting to justify your existence through actual achievement, reading every book you could find, hiring tutors with money you didn't have. But the damage was done, to yourself, to the church, to Christianity's moral authority. Some wounds never heal completely. Contemporary accounts describe your final years as increasingly withdrawn, melancholy, haunted by memories you couldn't escape, nightmares that woke you screaming, panic attacks during public ceremonies. The boy who'd thought he was being saved had instead been systematically destroyed, broken down, and rebuilt as someone else's pleasure. Your death in 1577 passed almost unnoticed, a footnote to a scandal everyone wanted to forget. But your story refuses to stay buried. It represents something larger than individual tragedy. the corruption of power, the exploitation of innocence, the way institutions can dress evil in sacred robes and call it holy. These patterns repeat across cultures and centuries. The details change, but the fundamental dynamic remains constant. Predators seek positions of trust. Victims are chosen for their vulnerability. Systems protect perpetrators over survivors. If this glimpse into history's hidden darkness has left you wanting to uncover more buried truths, I've prepared another journey into the shadows of the past that you won't want to miss. Click on the video appearing on your screen now to discover another shocking chapter that history tried to erase. And if you found this exploration as compelling as I did, hit that subscribe button so we can continue peeling back the layers of history together. These forgotten voices deserve to be heard, and there are so many more stories waiting to be told.